Hi, it's Richard here from Intelligent Advisor IT Consulting with another in our series about the example projects, which are provided with Oracle Policy Modeling. And this week we're going to be looking at the emergency response example project. As always, our goal is twofold. One, to understand what the project does out of the box, and how it showcases the features of Oracle Policy Modeling. And secondly, to investigate areas where you could perhaps extend what's been provided, either to help your learning journey so that you can practice on a real-life project, or maybe to adjust the content to a particular audience if you're involved in selling or at least presenting the capabilities of Oracle Intelligent Advisor to other people. So let's get started with the actual basic project. As you can see straight away here, the project, which of course, as you all know, is available from the project tab in example projects, and you scroll down and you pick the project that you want. This project is designed for small screens. So you can see that the idea is to simulate a simple user interface to allow a car driver or let's say someone involved in a road traffic accident. And the idea is that you would then describe the accident, how many vehicles were involved, and whether any dangerous goods or substances were involved in the accident. So here in the styles dialog, you can see that if I go to the styles dialog, I can see that the width of the interview has been set to 400. So the interview screen is 400 pixels wide. And there's a custom image, which is used in the header. And obviously the color scheme has been changed. So people have gone around and changed the background and active colors for the buttons and various other items of screen real estate. Let's go ahead and run this project right now so we get an idea of what it feels like for real. I'm going to use Control F5 to run it both in the debugger, but also open it in the default browser. There we go. And it's going to ask if it wants to know my location. I'm going to say yes. As you can see, very small format. And I'm using a slider here, which is the default in this project, to describe how many vehicles were involved. This is probably one area where you could improve the user experience. So I'm going to say there are 4 vehicles involved. And now I'm asked to select one or more dangerous goods. Now, of course, in different countries, in different jurisdictions, different signage is used. I think this must be probably the Australian signage. Most countries have similar ideas, but you might want to go to wherever your national or provincial legislation is to take a good idea as to how these things are organized. You can see, for example, here, and this is a Canadian guide, the hazardous goods are organized by class. We'll come back to this idea of class in a minute. So it's basically organizes them all by class. And then when you look at each class, you can see that there are lots of different items, lots of different icons. You can of course find these icons, by the way, in open source format on the internet if you want to change the icons that are used into an icon that is more appropriate. Let's go back. And so I've selected 3. I'll go next. And it's recorded my latitude and longitude, which was why the interview asked for my permission to take the latitude and longitude at the beginning, and I'll show you where that is in just a moment. If for whatever reason that doesn't work, for example, your provider blocks geolocation, you can then change the location and manually enter your address. You can click the show map, which is a very straightforward static map of my current location. This is not actually my current location. I've configured it to show a random house in Normandy in France. And we'll go back to how that works and how you might want to adjust that later. And we go to next and enter any other info. And that's it. The interview is finished. So it's primarily about screen display, screen size, and easy and quick point and click solutions to record information. And obviously one of the key points in there was the fact that it used a Google map to show you a static location. Let's go back to the project. I have several versions of this open, so I need to make sure that I have the right one. I think this is the right one. Yes, that's the right one. And let's go back to that project in particular. There we go. And we'll take a look at a couple of features of this project. So the first thing was, you'll notice that it asked me for my permission to get my location. That's because in the interview tab, two attributes have been created in the data tab, the location latitude and the location longitude, and these have been plugged into this setting here, which tells the motor that the browser needs to report on its geolocation. So this is leveraging the browser's capability and recording those two in a latitude and longitude. The latitude and longitude attributes, which you can see right here, are then used in a very simple pair of rules. As you'll see, there are very few rules in this project actually in general. So these GPS latitude and longitude attributes are used in two very simple rules. The first one is that if for whatever reason we are unable to obtain the GPS latitude and longitude, for example, you're in a country which doesn't allow it or your internet provider blocks the location, then we can highlight that you probably will need to go and use the manual address. So that's something we'll look at in just a second. That's related to the manual address entry that I showed you. And then we have the map URL, which is just a static string based on google.com.au. No prizes for guessing in which country this project was originally built, but basically taking the latitude and the longitude and creating a string of text which is sent to the browser to show you the static location. We're going to look at a way of how you can make this a little more fun, a little more interactive in just a moment. But going back to the GPS coordinates were recorded, if we return to our project and we go to the location page, and you'll see that this is the section where it says we're unable to determine your current location, will be hidden if the GPS coordinates were recorded is true. So this section will only display if there's a failure to record your GPS coordinates. And this is the manual entry that you can use as well. So here we have the collection of the manual address coordinates, and what you could do perhaps is set up a default so that it switches to manual address if the GPS coordinates were not recorded. That would be something we could do. Yeah, so we could change that to a default based on that. That's just a suggestion. Now let's look at the rest of this project and come up with some ideas as to how we could extend it. Well, as I mentioned earlier, most countries have their own set of icons and their own set of instructions as regards dangerous goods. I showed you a document which I borrowed from the web, which was from the Canadian authority, Transport Authority. And so the first thing I would say is you could probably change all these icons out. But before we talk about these icons, I want you to notice that each of these is actually a Boolean. So each of these is just a yes/no answer. And instead of displaying a yes/no as a radio button, which I'm sure most of us are familiar with, or as a couple of text buttons, these are using an image toggle. So each of these uses an image toggle. And for each of those image toggles, there are two images specified, literally if you will, the clicked image and the unclicked image. So that's how this is done. And those images are stored in custom files or wherever. They most likely, in a real scenario, you'd put them in the images folder. Now, I have put them somewhere else for this, but that's where you could put them and then you could reference them. So let's look at a slightly different version of this project using different icons. Let's take a look at this one, for example. So this one is using the Canadian icons, and as I said earlier, is using an image toggle. And each of these images, if I go into custom files, in my case, I seem to remember I was lazy. I didn't even put them into the images folder. You'll see that they are here in the resources folder. Of course, to be a good citizen, I really should have put them in the images folder, but that makes it easy for me to reference them in my image toggle. And you'll notice that I've extended the list of Booleans and I've added a bunch more icons because in this particular country, there are lots more icons to be displayed. So again, this was simply by referencing the online documentation for this particular country, and I grabbed open source icons to match. So now I have a whole bunch of extra Booleans, yes and no, to say whether it's a particular substance is present or not. Let's look at some other ways that you could enhance the interview. Well, one of the areas I think you could definitely enhance it is by using, as you can see here, we're using again a different display. We're using a horizontal text and image button group. And this is how many vehicles and how many heavy goods vehicles are involved. This is done using two value lists. So there's a value list for the trucks and a value list for the vehicles. And the value list, each item in the value list has images attached, clicked and unclicked, with the result that you get a nice little sort of visual display. I personally think it's quite attractive. And I've split it into light and heavy vehicles because obviously I thought to myself, well, in a vehicle accident, in a road traffic accident, it's not just about vehicles. You want to specify how many heavy goods vehicles and how many normal vehicles there were. That's just something that you could do to make it a little more entertaining and to demonstrate how cool these text and image button groups are. I've also, in this particular instance, split out the hazardous goods into an entity. And for each item in the entity, each instance in the entity, we have the icon type, we have a detail icon, and we have a classification. You may remember I spoke to you earlier about how in many countries, hazardous goods are broken down into classes. Well, in this particular instance, I took that concept a little bit further. And used an inference table to infer instances of the hazardous product, depending on whether certain signs have been clicked or not. So instead of just having a bunch of Booleans, I decided it would be nice to have an entity and to infer instances of the entity, which allows me to specify an icon and a classification. And for certain categories, there was a second icon. So some of them have, if I can find an example here, is there an example? No, I've managed to choose, not show you any examples that you have a different icon and detail icon, but there are certain categories where you have a primary icon and a secondary icon. And here's this notion of classification. Why did I do that? I did that for a couple of reasons. Let me go ahead and debug this one. Let me debug this in the default browser. So we'll open it up in a real browser because this uses a bunch of JavaScript as well. So first page, select the number of vehicles. Now we have our list of items. I went for a red highlight rather than a gray background. I thought it was more appropriate. I've added here a little not a hyperlink, a little tooltip with some explanation to help people understand which ones they should be clicking. And we'll go ahead and move to the next page now that we've selected our dangerous substances. And as seemed much more logical for modern devices, I've included a live Google map in the interview rather than having it in a pop-up window. And so you can click on this and there's a little pop-up window that says this is where an accident has occurred. This is actually where I am right now. And we continue on with the extra info as before. And the only difference is that the output now gives me the opportunity to split out the details by class. So we've got class 1 explosives, 3 different ones of class 1 explosive. Let's go back and choose the dangerous substances. Let's choose another one. Let's choose radioactive. And I think this is corrosive. None of them are particularly nice. So you'll see now that we have the different classes of product as well as just the simple details. And I've added some text so that this describes for the emergency services what it is exactly that they're having to deal with. These are just examples as to how you might carry on. Added a link at the end to the Transport Ministry of the province of Quebec. So let's take a look at how all that was done. So obviously we talked about the entity being created and inferring instances of a hazardous good. And we also talked just a moment ago about how the geolocalization now used a Google map. And you can see that there's a custom control down here. and the custom control. No great surprise. When we go into the styles dialog and click custom files, we'll find a JavaScript control which uses Google Maps to instance a map and put a marker on the map. And that's about it. So it's a nice straightforward Google Map example. If you're not into Google Maps, which I quite understand, you might not be, here's another example which is using instead a different library. Again, we'll open this up in So in this case, it's using Leaflet and Mapbox. So it's a slightly different image, same basic principle. So again, this one has a JavaScript file in the interview. Which uses Leaflet to generate the map. Same basic principle, just a different library. So what else could we do with this project now that we have it in our hands? Well, of course, we've seen several different things, but I'd say that this project is an excellent way to stretch your wings as far as modifying the styling is concerned. Really easy to do, really easy to back out of because it's supplied as a zip file. If you want to go back and try again, you just reselect emergency response and rub out your project and try again. The other reason it's a good one is because there are only 4 rules in the original project, 3 of which are essentially related to displaying or not the address details and the map. And there's only 1 which is essentially deciding whether there are hazardous goods or not. And these are the Booleans as to whether you've clicked a sign on it. This is a perfect territory, therefore, for introducing your own logic. I've seen demos of this project used to simulate, for example, loading goods onto a truck or loading goods onto a ship. I've also seen it used for deciding how to pack an aircraft container. There are all sorts of things you could use this project for with a degree of flexibility that is uncommon because there are no rules, basically. It's up to you to introduce whatever logic you want to. So that's it for the emergency response, and I look forward to seeing you again for the next one soon.